Hi, I'm Dr. Mike, and this is NFGeeks. Well, this is an NFGeeks Life Matters video. They used to be called Ask Dr. Mike Personal, but I decided to change the name. So this is the Life Matters video, where people submit personal questions to me in messages, emails, for me to answer here on NFGeeks. And this one is very close to my personal experience, so this is a good one for me to answer. Okay, so let me read it. It's from an ENFP. And this person writes, how does one properly respond to an aging parent that can no longer be held responsible for their own well-being? Meaning not manage their daily life, loss of interest in health, going places, etc. There's various problems that the person has had. One example is that the elderly person was putting on an oxygen tank but smoking at the same time, which is a recipe for disaster. Okay. A general self-destruction, or at least this person felt self-destruction. There's also an issue of trying to pass this parent back and forth. Currently, the brother of the person is taking care of the elderly person, and they want to sort of pass her around or send it's a mother, send the mother back to the CNFP, that kind of thing. So, the final part of the question is, Mike, could you please address what happens if one person can no longer be someone's caretaker, if they can't take it anymore? All right, so I am particularly experienced in this. I was responsible or partly responsible for the direct care of 3 elderly people in my immediate family, directly, people whom I had lived with, growing up with, not, distant relatives, but, literally people I grew up with my whole life, and then they became elderly and was involved in their care directly, or, directly with someone else, or just directly straight up. And that went on for like 20 years. That was about half my life I did that. So I I am very well aware of this situation, all right, so let me try to get to it, okay? And then I'll try to throw type in if I can. So the first part of the question was how to properly respond to someone who can't be held responsible for their own well-being. That's very, very hard, because here's what makes it hard, is that the relation dynamic when it started is the person being older than you and therefore used to giving orders and doing what they want and being the power position. And you as the caretaker, even if you're an adult, you're used to receiving orders from that person, okay? So it's very hard to break that, okay? It's not an equal, there's a hierarchy in that relationship that continues to exist into the care, okay, of the person, of the elderly person. And here's why that's bad. First of all, the person, still in a position of power, makes bad decisions that that cannot be stopped to a certain degree. You try to stop them, but really you can't, because they're just hell-bent on doing whatever it is they're hell-bent on doing. On the other end, because you've been in the position of the weaker position as a child growing up with this person, it's hard to force them to do things. It's hard to set boundaries. It's hard to take an action as the caretaker. It's very hard to, it doesn't mean you don't take actions, but it's very hard to get them to do anything just straight up that's good for them, unless you absolutely force it, and force it in a way that's not healthy for anybody. Sometimes it gets physical. That's one of the things people don't talk about, is physical abuse of the elderly and why that happens and how that happens. And it comes from part of that power dynamic that goes on. It's awful that goes on. So there's a major problem, because the power is the power is off to whatever degree that it's off. Okay. So that's one thing. The second thing is that the elderly person approaching death kind of takes on a fuck it attitude, as you can see in part of the question here. I only gave examples of what was in the question. The question was long, and so I wanted to get to the gist of it. They're self-destructive. in things because hey, fuck it, they only got a few years left. They want to live the way they want to live, and that's it. So, for example, I'll give a personal example. My mother, as she approached death over the last years of her life, decided that she was going to spend all the money and then some that she didn't have. She didn't care. She was like, look, I only have a few years in life. I'm going to be happy. I'm going to spend it. She enjoyed gambling, for example, and she blew a lot of it on gambling. Um, you know, you know, coming in with her cane or whatever, as many elderly people do, and just bought things that she wanted to buy, and that was it. She didn't worry about the finances of the house or anything. She didn't care. That was sort of her version of self-destructing. And there was very little that I could do about it because she owned what she owned and had the money that she had, and my sister couldn't do anything. So, it just went that direction. Um, so, how do you respond to that? Okay. It's hard not to respond badly. One thing I'm going to say, and anybody who takes care of elderly is either going to agree with this or is going to be frightened of it, okay? And that is that at some point dealing with the elderly, an elderly parent or something, and if you're the direct caregiver, at some point it breaks you. It breaks you. You break. I broke, okay? And everybody does under these conditions. So don't feel bad when it happens. We all break. And what break means is that you just run out of gas and give up. Okay, you just give up on whatever happens, and you're like, okay, screw it. This is going down, and this is spiraling downward, and I'm just gonna sit and watch because I can't do anything anymore. It does, and it's very emotionally, difficult and terrible because you can't stop it from happening, and you can't stop death from happening, and you can't stop a person reacting the way they're reacting to it. So you have to sort of take that into account. So my first thing is to realize, in terms of your interaction, you will break. It may not be till the last days, it might be right at the end, but it will break you. Okay, you will. You'll just throw your hands up. Okay, at some point, if you're the direct caregiver, you'll break. Now, so saying that, okay, the real way to respond is to kind of allow it to happen. And when I say allow it to happen, I mean death. Is to allow it to happen and not try to sustain. You can't. Well, you can sustain life, but you can't bring it back up. One thing they're dealing with the elderly is it goes like this. Okay, they're fine, like you normally know them, and then their health takes a dip that you didn't expect, and they stabilize, but they never go up the way they were. They stabilize, and then there's a plateau, and then they dip again, and then they plateau, but the plateau is shorter from the last time, and there's plateau, and they get shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter, and then finally, right off the cliff. That's how it feels. Even though they've been sick for a long time, when they start to truly die, whew, it's like they just tumble. It's like a tumbling. It happened really, really fast. Like with my mother's in terrible shape, but in the hospital, she kind of seemed like the way she normally was. And then in 2 days, whoop, right over, right into death. So, that's one thing to do. Another thing to do is to just sort of you can't block their behaviors to a certain degree. You can't because you can't be with them 24/7. Even if you're with them 24/7, you gotta sleep. So you can't block them from doing things, and they're gonna want to do things that they used to do. Okay. For example, my mother was a great cook, and she loved to cook, and she cooked for me and Noah in her last years, and we loved it and whatever. But she would have the oxygen on near the stove, and it wasn't an electric stove. And you could take the oxygen off for a little bit just to light a little, but she didn't care. She was just going to do it the way she wanted to do it because she had cooked. Now nothing happened, but on some level you kind of got to let things like that happen. Again, nobody wants an explosion. I didn't want one either, but there's things they're going to want to do in life that they always did, and you can't always block that. Okay. Now it gets to a point where because of other situations, they are doing things that are not related to their old life, because they have dementia or Alzheimer's or a stroke. So, for example, I took care of an uncle, with my mother, who lived with us our whole lives, and he had a stroke. And after the stroke, he was almost the same, but he wasn't the same. He tried to do old things that he used to do, but he couldn't do it. He couldn't hold screwdrivers, and he couldn't, hold himself. He couldn't, he would, urinate on himself and things like that. Not that he wanted to, but those things happen, all sorts of things. And believe me, you break, You absolutely break when that stuff's going down. You know, the proper way to respond again to that is to kind of accept it. Accept that this is what it is. You can't change it. The proper way to respond is just to try to make the person as comfortable as possible, and not so much to control their behavior. Okay, you'll want to control their behavior because they'll do. I mean, they did stupid things before. They'll do stupid things that are even worse, dangerous things. My mother was lucid, and she was with the oxygen and the fire and all that. But really, the best you could do is try to make them as comfortable as possible and accepting of what they are now and what the situation is. One of the things as the young person in the thing, you want to you want to kind of wish they were the way they were, and why can't this be normal again? It's not going to be normal again, ever, So try to make them as comfortable as possible, Doesn't mean you don't set boundaries. You try to set some boundaries around them, But you basically are adapting the environment to them. You're not having them adapt to the environment because that's near impossible. They're old, and if they have dementia, that makes it even harder. So adapt to the environment to them. That's going to be hard. Okay, it's not easy to do that, especially when they want to break through and do things that they want to do, And again, it will break you. Okay, it will break you. Now, the thing about passing back and forth, here's something that always happens, and both sides, there's pros and cons and good and bad, and you have to accept whatever side you're on. And that is the passing of the parent or whatever back and forth between siblings, or one sibling being the caregiver and one sibling not being the direct caregiver. Okay, and I've had that in my own life, And there's arguments for both sides, and there's also a burden on both sides. Okay, and my advice for that, because the question asked that, is that you have to, whatever position you're in, you have to accept that position, because that's the position you've chosen, to be honest. And you could have chose some other position, and so you chose a certain position, and so you have to own it. Okay, and you have to own the good and the bad with it. So if you're the position of the brother or sister or family member that decided to go live their own life and be separate from this, okay, the good of that is that you have peace of mind and mental health and less stress, and you can live your own life and move on and do things and build the life that you want, okay, and have that, okay. And that's the good news. That's the and your mental health is better. You're stronger. You've built more of a life for yourself. The purpose of doing that actually happens, and that's a good thing. The payment for that is that you weren't there, to do certain things, and you weren't there for either the caregivers or the elderly person. Obviously, there's always visits and things like that, but there's a distance, there's a separation, there's a whatever, okay, and you have to sort of accept that you did that for you, right or wrong, okay, and that that did have an impact on the situation and an impact on people and their view of things and the view of you and all that. You got to take the good with the bad. This is like the other one I recently did about the gay brother. You have to make a choice. That's the choice you made. As good sides and bad sides, you made your choice. Okay. For the caregiver, and that was the position I was in. The good part about this is a sense of fulfilling a duty and responsibility and having a clean moral conscience. I have to say that's part. At least that's what I experienced. I was also there for my mother's death. I on a little aside here, I do recommend it when the person dies to be there, like in the room. I know it seems like it'd be horrifying, but actually it's very spiritual and therapeutic, and I absolutely recommend that you do it. If you can be there when the person passes, in the room, literally, be in the room when somebody passes. It does more good than harm, a lot more good. You'd think it's the other way around. But, one of the things I feel is a clean conscience, okay, about it. I felt like I fulfilled a duty, a responsibility of caring, and I feel good about that. And Noah, too. Noah was with me. We did it together in many ways, especially as he got older. Now, the bad side of that I have to own is that my life came to a halt, and it became stalled, and it became stagnated, and it took a toll on me. And to be bitter about it against my mother or anybody else is wrong. I have to take responsibility for that. Okay? And it did stall my life. It stalled my dissertation and PhD. Actually, now I'm glad I did Myers-Briggs dissertation, but I was originally going to do something about the Old Testament that was really cool about discourse. I was going to use Foucault and what goes on in the Old Testament. Was actually a very cool idea. But I was exhausted from caring for my mother. And the summer before she died almost right before Thanksgiving. The summer before, she was a mess, and I was exhausted. And I went to go meet with somebody in the religious studies department of the university I went to talk about this idea, and they totally dissed me. They didn't want to do it. And normally, in a previous point in my graduate career, I would have really fought that battle. I would say, no, you're gonna, I would have been, I had energy. But I kind of like just went, okay, and just, and left. And I went to the car and I realized I have no energy left for this dissertation. I can't write this thing. I got nothing. I got nothing in my gas tank. Okay, how can I write? I remember thinking that in the car, But that was my choice. I didn't have to make that choice either. I made that choice, and the impact of it is that it stalled my life in many, many ways. I probably lost the relationship before the doctor. I probably lost over this because at the beginning of my mother's, when she really got sick, I was living with somebody, and she was getting worse and worse and worse. And I think the person I was with partly is that she couldn't take it anymore because she didn't have anything in her background about caring for people, elderly people. So, it was new to her. And whereas I lived with elderly people my whole life, it was new to her. And, and she couldn't take it. I think part of it, she couldn't take the stress of it. There are other things too, but I do think that being the caregiver of my mother impacted the ending of that relationship very much so. So that's again that's a choice that I made. So my life got incredibly impacted by being that caregiver, but I chose that. So whatever suffering I suffered through, and whatever suffering I have now because of that, is also my fault. So that's what I mean. You have to sort of own where you are. So if a family member is taking care of the person, they have to own that, whatever's going on with them, because they chose that. And if the person, there's a sibling that has not been involved and is gone to have their own life, they also have to own that. And whatever the consequences of that, that's you just have to accept that that's what happened. Okay, either way. All right, because that always happens. That happens in every situation. So lastly, what happens? So again, what happens if the person? Let me move this over so I can read it properly. What happens if the person can no longer be the caregiver? That kind of happens when you break. I mean, for some moment you break. Okay, that's real. And I think you break near the tipping point of death. I think that's kind of where it happens. And I think death comes after that very quickly. Okay, because you're not doing what you need to do. Maybe they sense it. That's what happens. Okay, and then you just kind of go for the ride. I know that's what I did. You just kind of go for the slide down, into into death. There's not a lot you can do. I mean, if you're the person taking care of the person, where are you going to go? There is that sort of trapment that it feels like, because you've already sort of invested time and made the choice to be involved in care of this elderly person. But what can you do after that? Not much, except to break, to be honest. If the person who's doing the caretaking has a support system for them, maybe this will stop. I really didn't have one, especially after that relationship ended. I didn't Noah. It was just me and Noah, really. So I didn't have anybody around me directly to be involved. So, maybe if there was some kind of caregiving for the caregiver, that might make a difference to do it. But honestly, it's not a job. Once you become that caregiver, it's not a job you get to you get to say no to. You're in till the end, till death. That's for sure. All right, so one last thing then. Kind of gonna want to throw some type in. I know that as an ENFP, it definitely stressed me out, and I definitely came to a complete halt. That complete ENFP halt. Actually, I broke right before she died, about a month before she died. I just ran totally out of gas, and I came to a complete halt, and I couldn't do anything else anymore because of everything. She was really deteriorating for a long time. About 4 or 5 years. It was going down, and I broke the other times too. Everybody breaks. And I think that's the FI. It just really hurts more than people realize. And people don't take it seriously how hurt you are and how much pain as an ENFP that's going on regarding these issues. People didn't really understand how suffering I was, over this. Somehow I didn't receive sympathy, for whatever reason. I couldn't ask for sympathy either, but, they weren't clear on that issue, And so that's one way that it affected me as an ENFP, It affected my son as Noah as an SJ in that he had to do everything. He was on call like a soldier at all moments, at all times. He would hang out in her apartment and watch TV or whatever, but he was sort of like security guard, 24/7 in there. So I mean that was his SJ coming through. And my mother didn't mind. My mother liked him better. She liked me. She really did. No, she genuinely liked him better, than she liked me. It's okay. I accept that. So I think that's what happens with type. Okay, so that's it. Thanks for watching. As always, come join the fun on the NFGeeks Facebook forum. We have a lottery for MBTI typing there. You can get a free typing, and I also provide typing services for $50. Okay, you can just email me at nfgeeks@gmail. Cheapest on the internet, and come follow us on Twitter and on Tumblr. And as always, it's happening. It is, even in spite of this rather gloomy video. It's happening.